The Modern American Library presents the Red Scare of the 1950s. In this exhibit at the museum, we will be explaining how the Second Red Scare affected government, movies, and television at home. The period following the end of the Second World War in 1945 sparked a new development in the anti-communist sentiment of the United States. With increased tensions with the Soviet Union, the government, television, and movies became influenced by the Red Scare. During the Second World War, the Central Powers, the US, Britain, and the USSR, cooperated with one another to defeat the common enemy, the Axis powers Germany, Italy, and Japan. However, the Soviet Union and the United States had clashing views of the post-war world, which created a schism in their previously friendly relations. The beginning of the Red Scare is debatable since several factors led up to it. Some argue that the Yalta Conference of 1945 sparked the first Red Scare tensions. Others argue that the beginning of the communist searches by the HUAC in 1947 was the official start of the Red Scare. In response to the increased fear of communism, the federal government began passing several laws and forming organizations to help citizens feel less vulnerable to possible communist infiltrations.
The House Un-American Activities Committee was a committee of the House of Representatives, and it was formed in 1938, initially with the intention of investigating communist and fascist organizations that became active during the Great Depression. From the beginning, the HUAC formed a lot of political discord. However, when the Second World War ended in 1945, tensions rose between the United States and the Soviet Union. This changed the HUAC's purpose and goal into investigating communist activities with new interest. Especially after 1947, when the Cold War was in full swing, HUAC assumed more influence and notoriety, and the committee conducted a series of high-profile hearings suggesting that communists had infiltrated government, schools, the entertainment industry, and many other areas of American life. The HUAC used the controversial methods of subpoenas and blacklists to detect communists. Usually, alleged communists received a subpoena to go before the committee, were drilled about their political views, and were asked about people who allegedly took part in subversive activities. Suspects who refused to answer the committee's questions or provide names were convicted of contempt of Congress and were imprisoned. For example, on November 24, 1947, Hollywood 10 people from the entertainment industry, was cited for contempt of Congress after not answering the HUAC's questions. The Hollywood 10 charged that their First Amendment rights had been violated in the investigation. Soon after the conviction of Hollywood 10, studio executives under the Motion Picture Association of America announced the firing of the 10 men under the Waldorf Statement and blacklisted them during a meeting held in Waldorf Astoria in New York City. Subjects of HUAC investigations had the option of invoking their right to avoid self-incrimination under the Fifth Amendment, but doing so created the impression that they were guilty of a crime. In addition, those who refused to cooperate were often blacklisted by their employers, which meant they lost their jobs and were prevented from working in their preferred industry.
A major movie of the time, Roman Holiday, was created in 1953 and stars some of the biggest actors of the era, Gregory Peck and Audrey Hepburn. One of the Hollywood 10, Dalton Trumbo, created its screenplay under a pseudonym. He won an Oscar for his work, although he never received credit on screen for his actual name. Critics of the HUAC compared the practices of the committee to the Salem witch trials, since citizens were often convicted with no evidence. Such critics included actors and screenwriters who formed the Committee for the First Amendment to protest the unconstitutional treatment of the Hollywood 10. An example of another star who was blacklisted is Lucille Ball, an actress. Her grandfather was a follower of Eugene V. Debs, and he convinced Lucille to register to vote as a communist. Years later, after this was discovered, she was blacklisted and banned from studios. Yet she was able to sustain her career by creating her own production company and the television series I Love Lucy. The Weavers, an American folk singing group who was famous during the 1940s and 50s, were suddenly accused of engaging in communist activities and were blacklisted during 1952. Two of the band members were called to the House Committee of Un-American Activities, where they were forced to disband.
The Taft-Hartley Act, or otherwise known as the Labor Management Relations Act, made major changes to the Wagner Act of 1935, after much resistance from labor leaders and a veto from President Truman, it was passed on June 23, 1947. This act declared all closed shops, the practice of allowing only unionized employees to work for a particular company, illegal, permitted union shops only after a majority of employees voted for them, forbade jurisdictional strikes and secondary boycotts, and lastly, forbade unions from contributing to political campaigns. Like many other acts passed during this era, it gave more power to the executive branch of government. It allowed the president to appoint a board of inquiry to investigate union disputes when he believed a strike would endanger national health or safety, and obtain an 80-day injunction to stop the continuation of a strike. It also required union leaders to take an oath stating that they weren't communists. Although people tried to repeal the act, it stayed in effect until 1959 when the Landon-Griffin Act amended some of its features. This law established a code of conduct guaranteeing certain rights to union members within their union and imposed reporting requirements on union workers. These provisions were assigned for administration to the Department of Labor, and thus the Landon-Griffin Act protected employees' union membership rights from unfair practices by unions.
When the Soviets dropped their first atomic bomb on the United States on August 29, 1949, it led to a great deal of fear in the United States, since this was their real first atomic threat. This caused many investigations about communists giving atomic bomb secrets to the Soviet Union. The high-profile prosecutions ended in the execution of the Rosenbergs. Joseph McCarthy noticed the prosecutor, Roy Cohn, and recruited him to be the chief of his staff. The couple was accused of selling nuclear secrets instead of treason since they were not at war with the Soviet Union. The brother-in-law of Julius Rosenberg, David Glassberg, was a machinist in Los Alamos where the atomic bomb was built. Glassberg stated that Rosenberg forced him to pass confidential information to the Soviet Union about the bomb. The information was passed by an acquaintance of Glassberg, Harry Gold. The only solid evidence was Glassberg's confession, which led leftists to believe he was only prosecuted because of his membership in the Communist Party. The Rosenbergs were offered a trade for their death penalty if they admitted their guilt, which they refused to do, and were executed. In the Whittaker Chambers trials, Alger Hiss, a State Department official, was accused of being a communist spy for the Soviet Union in 1948. A highly respected man at the time, Hiss denied all the charges made by the HUAC, and was convicted of perjury for denying his involvement in Soviet affairs in 1950. Richard Nixon, then an unknown first-time congressman from California, gained a lot of fame for his pursuit of Alger Hiss, and was elected president later in 1968. Whittaker Chambers, Hiss's accuser, died in 1961 and received the Medal of Freedom from the Reagan administration, even though he was formerly an admitted communist spy. Although Hiss was never released, there continues to be debates about his innocence. His case is still on the public stage, with several books being published either condemning or criticizing Hiss. Hiss's trial led to the rise of Senator Joseph McCarthy of Wisconsin, who created McCarthyism, the practice of making accusations of subversion or treason without proper regard for evidence. It also means the practice of making unfair investigative allegations or using unfair investigative techniques, especially in order to restrict the dissent of political criticism.
During the Truman administration, Truman passed Executive Order 9835 in 1947, also known as the Loyalty Order, which created the start of the spread and publicization of anti-communist conspiracy theories. It required federal civil service employees to be checked for quote-unquote loyalty and to conclude whether those who are disloyal belong to a certain group or organization. The Wheeling speech, made by Senator Joseph McCarthy in 1950, revealed that he was in possession of a list of over 200 members of the State Department who were quote-unquote known communists. In fact, during his speech in Virginia, he waved a sheet of paper at the audience. However, this barely reached the American people because McCarthy was not willing to reveal any names or show any proof or evidence supporting his accusations.
The Red Channels, otherwise known as the Blacklist, was a pamphlet released to the public that labeled 151 people in the entertainment industry either communist or red fascist sympathizers and said that they had a communist influence over the radio and the television. All the men and women on the list were fired from their jobs and were not reemployed. The Red Channels show the extent of America's communist fear and how it affected major parts of society and its portrayal of top celebrities. The McCarran Internal Security Act was created in response to those who criticized the Truman presidency for not being severe enough on communist supporters. The act required communist action and communist front organizations to enroll with the Justice Department, although President Truman vetoed the act because he thought it would help, not hurt, the communists. Congress overruled his decision.
Color television was first introduced in 1951. However, the transition from black and white to color television was a slow one. The first television series was one called The Premiere, consisting of actors such as Ed Sullivan and Gary Moore. Additionally, because the government owned all the newspapers, radio channels, and television series, shows and ads that were aired emphasized the color red. Not only did the Red Scare affect television, but it also affected live entertainment. For example, playwright Arthur Miller published A Crucible in 1953 to show the parallelism between the Salem witch trials and the interrogations and accusations of American citizens, such as himself, of being communist spies. Miller was put before the HUAC for being a communist, but he denied all charges and was released.
Many movies were created in this time period that expressed a theme of anti-communism. The movie The Red Menace, released in 1949, was about an ex-GI, Joe Bill Jones, who becomes involved with the CPUSA. While in training, he falls in love with his instructor. They realize his mistake in joining the Communist Party when they witness the murdering of a member who's questioned the party's principles. When they try to leave the party, the two are marked for murder and are hunted by the party's assassin. Another important movie, The Commies Are Coming, which came out in 1962, was about an American man who awakens to find that communist forces have taken over the United States. The usage of video entertainment to change the beliefs of the American people about communism was popular and effective at the time. The Smith Act trials was a series of federal prosecutions conducted from 1949 to 1958 in which leaders of the Communist Party of the United States of America were accused of violating the Smith Act. One of the more popular trials was the Dennis versus U.S. Supreme Court case. The case began in 1948 when the General Secretary of the American Communist Party, Eugene Dennis, was arrested and convicted of having violated the Smith Act. The court case went all the way up to the Supreme Court, which, on June 4, 1951, upheld the Smith Act of 1940, which made it a criminal offense to advocate the violent overthrow of the government or to organize or be a member of any group or society devoted to such advocacy.
The Communist Party of the United States of America, or the CPUSA, was a left-wing political party founded in 1919, 2 years after the Russian Bolshevik Revolution. The leaders of the CPUSA were accused of violating the Smith Act, and 12 of them were on trial as part of the Foley Square trial.
McCarthy died on May 2, 1957. He was in the Marines, stationed in the Pacific in World War II. He became the junior senator of Wisconsin by challenging Robert La Follette using his soon-to-be-famous aggressive attack method. He took communism as an issue to gain re-election and declared over 200 known communists in the State Department. Even after being the most famous Red Hunter, he failed to uncover one communist in or out of the government. In the Army McCarthy hearing on national television, people saw McCarthy for what he was, a bully. Edward Murrow contributed to the political downfall of McCarthy as well. A broadcaster for popular programs of the time, including Small World and See It Now, Murrow was a staunch anti-communist. However, he had a strong sense of civil and political liberties. On his show, See It Now, he, along with co-host Fred Friendly, criticized McCarthy and analyzed his weak charges and statements. His efforts were finally paid off on December 2, 1954, when the U.S. Senate reprimanded McCarthy for his witch hunts against innocent citizens. McCarthy lost his credibility and drowned his sorrows in alcohol. His alcoholism caused him to become very sick, and he died in Bethesda, Maryland. Thank you for watching our introductory video on the Second Red Scare. We hope you learned a great deal on how the Second Red Scare affected the government and popular culture. Please enjoy the rest of our exhibit.